Great. I am with Steve Addison today, and Steve's calling from down under. I am up top, up in Seattle. He's in Melbourne. And Steve, if you don't know Steve, Steve is a student of movements. In fact, he runs the website, the popular blog and podcast, movements.net. And you can find him there on the internet at movements.net. He has several books. I just want to mention them right up front, Steve. The first one that I knew of from you was Movements That Changed the World. And it's talking about how the gospel has spread through history, through movements. And then your second book was What Jesus Started, Joining the Movement and Changing the World. And then your most recent one is Pioneering Movements, Leadership That Multiplies Disciples and Churches. And I'm excited to have you on, Steve. I've learned a lot from you over the years, and I'm excited to hear from you today, and so are our listeners.
Thank you. It's good to be with you.
Yeah. So, Steve, you in each of your books, you're talking about movements, and your whole website is movements.net. What's a movement?
Well, in its sort of simplest form, any movement, good or bad, is a group of people committed to a common cause. My focus is really movements that multiply disciples and churches.
Great. And where are you seeing those currently happening around the world?
Okay. Well, the exciting thing is, Mission Frontiers ran an article recently where they were able to identify over 650 movements around the world.
Wow.
Then, when we're talking about multiplying movements of disciples and churches, we're talking generational growth. And so disciples are making disciples, churches are planting churches. And when we consistently get to 4 generations of new disciples, new churches, then we're well on the way. That's the threshold to say we're in a multiplying movement. So we're tracking 650 around the world.
So when you say generations, you mean someone leads somebody else to faith, and then that person leads somebody else to faith, and so on, 4 generations out.
And if we're seeing 100 churches, it's because churches are starting new church, and those churches that are starting them are out of the harvest. It's not just one busy church planter.
Wow.
And so it's happening in the Muslim world. In a limited way, it's happening in the Western world. But obviously the majority of them are to be found in places like South Asia. Nepal is just wonderful things that are happening there. North India, but Africa. So that's what we're looking for. But the skills, the patterns, the characteristics are worthy of application even before you get to that multiplication. So we're not seeing it a lot. It's happening in places like Europe. We have, good case studies now, Czech Republic, France, Germany. But it's, Michelle and I have just spent 3.5 years based in Britain and working throughout the UK and Europe. It's hard. But those same movement principles apply even in a Western setting, and we are seeing early breakthroughs.
Great to hear. Well, let's talk about some of those leadership principles, the movement principles, and then what do we need to do as ministers or people who want to be involved with what God's up to in the UK or in Europe? What are some of the principles that can help move us along that you've seen effective?
Well, the first book I wrote was all about, white hot faith, commitment to the cause, rapid mobilization of workers, gospel spreading through contagious relationships, and methods that are adaptive, that can transfer, that can multiply. So simple but profound methods. But since then, I've been doing some more work in the scriptures and around the world, looking at best practice, and I've added in the whole pioneering leadership. So the last book I've written on pioneering movements looks at that apostolic calling. So, but not just, that sort of national leader who sees the big picture, but how do we grow workers at every level in a movement, right at the beginning from seed sowers. And then I've done some more work that's been probably come as a bit of a surprise to people. It's not just those things like here's our methods, here's how it spreads through networks of relationships. But I've gone back into the scriptures and said, well, Jesus as a founder, what characterized who he was? Not just, so we've done the work to see how he did what he did.
Yeah.
But what was it about his identity? And just sort of, I won't get into too much depth, but in the story of his baptism and wilderness testing, identified three keys, which is surrendered and under the authority of God's living word, filled and empowered and dependent upon the Holy Spirit. And then the third thing in those two stories is focused and laying down his life for the core missionary task. So these are about not so much techniques, but identity. And so, it's been interesting as you work with leaders, and this is where, for those who are familiar a bit with Robert Clinton or Bobby Clinton's work, to see how God is tracking leaders in their development on two tracks, their skills and their ability, the technique, how do we do this, how do we train, all the how-tos. But at the same time, their spiritual and character formation, who they are. And so you don't get to movements just by pressing technique buttons, even if those principles and patterns are in Scripture or if they're best practice around the world. There's also an identity piece. And so coaching has got to address both levels of development, and your access point maybe at one or other of, is it the doing side? This is a fresh young practitioner. Well, get out and do some stuff.
Yes.
And it's going to be more directive, not so much telling them what to do, but you get some training, find out in your field what's best practice, go do it. And then the coaching is really to support them in the process of just getting out and getting experience, seeing God work, learning. It doesn't mean they won't change, that they just have to adopt what everyone else is, but they should at very least start with best practice. So you really focused on, is this somebody who wants to roll up their sleeves and do something? Then they can reflect on that experience. But then you might come across leaders, and I often do, where they know more about best practice and doing than I, they're not coming to me as a skills coach.
Yes, they get it. They studied it.
Yes, but they might be in a major transition in their life and ministry. They might be in what Bobby Clinton calls a life crisis. And now we're going, and it's a totally different scene. First of all, you've filtered, because my ministry is movement, so you've filtered to say, this person really is one of those pioneering leaders. And it appears sovereignly God's brought us, for a period of time while they're going through this major transition. And that's where some of Bobby Clinton's stuff's just pure gold. But it's around the task of multiplying movements. I can't do that sort of coaching with everybody. I have to select. So you've really got to approach, some people I'm getting them started. So, it's get some training, go do something, and then I'll support them in that. Others, I guess they're more strategic leaders, and it's more about who they are. And obviously everybody's, both of those things are going on all the time. but there'll be key phases where one is the focus.
Yes. I really resonate with what you're saying. We work with a lot of people through our coaching training who do have some experience behind them, and they're wanting to see more happen, but their old ways of doing it, sometimes the skill parts aren't working. So they come to us looking for more skills in communication and how to work in empowering ways. But what ends up being transformed is the heart. You used a different term for it, but it's the heart gets transformed because it takes, in order to really come alongside someone and coach to draw them out rather than teach them and tell them what to do, that takes a different kind of heart position to do that. And and that becomes
and you've got to create space too for God to work in that moment in their lives.
Yes.
Whereas if I'm talking the whole time, God doesn't get a word in.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and that's one of the big things that we're seeing with people is do you even allow the Holy Spirit to, speak to the other person, or are we so busy talking to them that they don't get to hear? And that's been I don't have a ton of experience with movements, but where we have seen it, for example, in Discovery Bible Study, the idea of leading a Bible study with people who are pre-believers, where you're looking at the scriptures and then you're asking questions that draw out from them what God might be saying to them, is a profound way of discipling people to hear from God and then respond with obedience. Where are you seeing, Steve, as you see, there's many different, I know you are in touch with many different people at different stages of movements and leading and trying to go for those sorts of things. But where are you seeing the coaching skills be an essential element of that process? Like for me, DBS, if you don't know how to draw out from people by listening and asking questions to follow up, if you can't draw out from people like that, you'll fall back on just teaching. And you're not going to be able to do a Discovery Bible Study well because you just fall into old ways. How about in your experience, where are you seeing that people need this kind of drawing out, come alongside skills? What elements of the process are you seeing it?
Well, I think I'm just thinking. I think there's less of that in movements at the entry level of leaders.
Okay.
So there is best practice.
Yes.
And you don't want to go to non-directive, open-ended questions with someone who hasn't done their homework.
Sure.
So there needs to be, so really at that entry level, it's less of that non-directive stuff. It's more of, it's like you come and learn how to play football.
Yes.
You're in the squad, you learn.
Yes.
Now, at a higher level where an athlete knows, this is my job, this is, here's the strategy, all of those things are in place. But what separates the great teams is there's another element that just can't come out of the coaching manual. And so it tends to be more at that level. And those leaders too, also, they're serious players. And they know more about what they're doing than you know. And that's important you're sitting across the table or on video with the leader and you're thinking, why are they talking to me?
Yes.
And that's a good experience to have. From their perspective, the less I say, the smarter they think I am,
And so how
people have these fridges of coaches.
Yeah.
And what they don't realize is I learned everything about movements from talking to people just like them.
Yes.
So when you've got that situation, there it's important to expect that God, the Holy Spirit, and the living Word are at work, and so this leader needs to hear their voice. They need to hear themselves talking about the struggle and where they're stuck. And again, it may be a technical thing. It may be, no, God is sovereign and He's teaching you some things. And so, you just learn to ask some questions, confident that the person, across the table is a serious player and God is present. Your job is a little bit like a midwife. And sometimes you'll be talking about, hey, my wife and I aren't in this together, and it's putting a lot of strain on our relationship, or she wants to leave the field, or what do I, and again, I'm not a counselor, and I'll tell them that if you need counseling, you can, but I'm going to press into where is God in this, and occasionally I'll say, well, where would you find someone struggling like this in the scriptures? So let's delve into the life of Paul, because it's not all strategy and tick the right boxes, but he's in turmoil. He's facing things he can't control. Where is God in all of that? So it's almost, when you've got a leader at that level and they're in a major boundary or a life crisis, you've really got to see this is a holy moment. So your job is to create the space where they can hear their own voice and hear from God.
That is fantastic to hear, or fascinating to hear. What you said right away is that they know more about their situation and what's going on than you do. And I think that right there, Steve, even before you get into all the great stuff you did as far as listening and drawing out and providing a place for them to reflect and for God to speak to them, that's all fantastic. But even before that, this whole concept of they don't need your information is so huge, because we're so stuck on the fact that they need our information. The reason they're not moving forward, the reason they're stuck, is because they don't have enough information, or they don't know something. And guess who does? Or I don't know for sure, but maybe. And then we want to share. So I love that. I love that stance to view the person as somebody who is capable, who is hearing from God, who knows more about their situation, and then use the process of the communication process that will draw all that out and see all that emerge. I think that's fantastic.
Let them. It sounds funny, but sometimes you think these questions are so inane and the answers are so obvious. And then a leader will look at you, and at some point, at one stage, I actually had that thought, what am I achieving here? And the guy just looks up at me, and he said, Steve, it is so good to talk to someone, and a whole lot more was going on while I'm sitting there trying to look interested and thinking, am I wasting this guy's time? Because he's just talking. And I think it's important, though, because of the nature of my role, I am going to filter the leaders I talk to, because my calling is to empower apostolic leaders to multiply disciples and churches. And so, for some of them, if they're more on the early stages of that journey, I'm not going to teach them like this, but I will, and Bobby Clinton has a number of sort of empowering roles, and one of them is the sponsor.
Yes.
So I'm going, especially if it's an isolated leader who's worked it out, himself or herself, but there's missing pieces. I'm going to say now, who are you connecting with who are doing what you're doing or trying to do?
Mm-hmm.
And so the learning, they still need learning and information. And maybe I know that stuff, but I'll connect them. And the great thing about, the internet is those people could be anywhere in the world. And then that comes together. And it's not just the information, it's the relationships that are formed, the camaraderie, and there's something also, maybe it's because I'm an old guy now, but I think it happened when I was a younger coach as well. There's something happening, just like that guy said, it's so good to talk to someone. It's not just they have the answers, but actually we do represent something to them. Mm-hmm. The less we talk, the wiser we are in their eyes. And I don't always, sometimes I feel awkward about that, but God is using us as a presence in their life. Somehow the Lord is at work also in the dynamic of the relationship, in that sort of coaching role. Just our presence makes a big difference as well.
Yeah.
As long as that presence with those questions that are helping them hear their own voice and hear the voice of God.
Yes. Well, that is one definition of coaching for me is doing that, is just asking those questions so they can hear their own voice and reflect and hear God's voice and then obey it. So fascinating. I was with another leader, and it's on another broadcast with Felix Ortiz. And Felix was talking about how millennials, for example, really want your mentoring. They want your coaching. They don't care what you call it. They want the connection with you. But this generation is the most connected informationally that exists. And what they don't want from you is information. What they want from you is what's the meaning of all of this information? What's the meaning and perspective on what's happening to them? And they can Google facts and info, but what they can't get is the perspective on it. So when you talk about, you're tying in for me that same conversation of when we talk about what's happening in their life, it's what's God doing. So here's the circumstances. They know their circumstance. That's not so unclear, but it's what does it mean to them, and what is God doing through this set of circumstances? That's where I think we can be the biggest help.
All of those things that are tearing me apart have meaning.
Yes, exactly.
And especially, I don't know. I don't know if it's millennials or just young adults at any generation, but especially the guys that've got the drive, they've got and the stuff that gets in their way doesn't have meaning. It's just stopping them achieve the goal or find their identity. And a guy called Terry Walling, who we know well, did this for me. It's just where's God in this?
Yes.
I've been on
Terry Walling's sofa for 2 days too, finding out. Terry leads a teleclass series with us on transitions that leaders make off of his book called Stuck. And he leads that. It's very valuable.
So it's helping them see these are not just distractions but God has an agenda, and it's that 2-track formation, who they are, what they do, their skills and their identity or just who they are.
Yes.
And so the questions that every now and again, okay, my church plant's not growing, all right? So instead of fixing that, to switch to the other side of the equation, where's God in this? And how are you going in your key relationships? That is, you're preaching when you ask those questions, but you're not,
Sure.
Because all of a sudden the awareness rises. Now there'll be some other people that lean too heavily towards the being stuff, as though we can just sit in our lounge room and be, and somehow the world will get one. Well, then you ask some questions. Okay, how is this being fleshed out in the mission you're called to? You know, so it's a wonderful privilege, and having a couple of mind maps to guide you along the way, and understanding what hat do I need to wear right now. Is it the non-directive sort of mentor coach? And do I need to be a sponsor right now and connect this guy with some other key guys who won't so much coach, but he'll learn from them as peers. So I'm making sure they're not just relying on me, and we're ticking some boxes. And I don't think the coach should be a specialist in anything. You know, I don't know what your view, but if I hit with a pioneering leader, you know, he's stuck at how to get from multiplying 3 generations to 4. Okay, well, he can read my book if he likes.
Yes,
but I'm going to connect him to someone who's done that. Is he stuck in a crisis in his marriage? I'm going to make sure he and his wife find a good process to work that issue through. I'm not going to become his marriage counselor, but I will be his coach to check in that he's tracking those issues. So we need to remain generalists, not just in the skill stuff, but even the being stuff, the character and spiritual formation. Okay, where are you? You know, you really need to deepen that walk with God. What are you going to do? Who could you connect with? You know, rather than now I've got 6 hats: counselor, spiritual director, skills coach. I try and be the clearinghouse that touches those things. Except, and this is more just my calling. It seems to be God does use me with these apostolic leaders in major transitions. And so for sometimes 3 to 6 months, well, let's catch up regularly. Let's walk you through this major, it might be a crisis or a major transition in their life and ministry. And that, so I know, okay, it ticks the boxes. I'll do it. Yeah.
Well, I fully agree with what you're saying, Steve. My line has been coaches aren't specialists in the content that they're coaching, but in the process, the coaching process. And what you just talked through about coaching someone about how they can get spiritual formation and transition and marriage and skills help out there, that's exactly what often happens. Sometimes we can work on it with them a little bit, but if they really need a lot of work, more than just an hour with us, then they need to go with somebody else. And I love that. I think that's a great way of doing it. And it also gets back to what we talked about at the beginning of the call, where the coach's mindset, your mindset, my mindset needs to be that I am not the answer for these people. I'm not going to provide the answer. I am not the resource for these people. Instead, what I am is I'm maybe in what we're talking about, like a conduit, the connector. You used Bobby Clinton's term sponsor, to help introduce them through the coaching. And I think that's a fantastic position for us to be in. We'll see a lot more people get helped. Yeah.
Yes. I think the other thing I just throw out is that in a movement, and one of the tribes we connect with globally is called No Place Left. All different backgrounds, churches, mission agencies, but committed to there being no place left across our field and the globe. A lot of the coaching, I don't have a formal relationship, but here we are. We're all catching up in Houston or Dubai or something like that. And you don't even have to formally put the hat on, but you're going for a walk. You're sitting down over breakfast, and you're just doing it and modeling it so it becomes the culture. within a movement. And there are others who have that same approach. Not everybody, some of them are just hard charged, got a problem, just suck it up.
Yes.
They're just pioneers. They just go for it. But there are a lot of not just formal but informal environments where you can apply that, and it's still, sometimes it troubles me, sometimes it amazes me, but people will say, this guy changed my life. Not everybody, but some guys,
Sure.
will say, he's changed my life
Mm-hmm.
when they introduce him. And I think, what did I do? And people have done that for me. Others have made that impact on my life, both through the formal side or just periods of time where we just sat or walked, and it's been a divine contact.
Mm. Well, that's what we are training leaders to do, through training them in coaching skills and mindsets and tools. Because the skills that you have, Steve, what's coming naturally to you, and actually you've been working on it your whole life, I know, how to ask better questions and to hear what God's doing in someone's life and so on. People, a lot of leaders can't do that. In fact, most leaders don't do it naturally. And that's what we've been up to, helping to train with that. And so we every year, I'm not sure if you know it, but every year down in Barcelona, we do an English language coaching training, which is a week-long training for ministry leaders. And I know my heart is big for movements and church planting, and I come out of the Asia context, and we also do it in Asia, but see that in Europe as well. So, Steve,
Yes.
just as we close today, I'd love to have you share, if you've got something that's come to mind as we've been talking, what would be a resource? I know you have some videos, you have some video training, you have a couple of books. What's a resource or two that we could steer people to so that they could find out more about what you're talking about, find out more about movements?
Look, I think if they just went straight to movements.net,
Okay.
and it depends how they learn. There are books they can buy. There's a whole video channel, and overwhelmingly, I'm interviewing practitioners, both for the videos, but that also appears on the Movements podcast, 150 plus episodes. Mm. So movements.net would be probably the best place. And then there's places where they can go get training either here. We're sort of training around Australia and the South Pacific, but we have people in Europe, in Britain, and then a lot of No Place Left partners in the US.
Great. Well, Steve Addison, thank you for joining me today. Visit Steve's website at movements.net and check out his books, particularly his new one, Pioneering Movements, which is on leadership. Thank you again for being on with us, Steve.
Thanks, Keith. It's been great to reconnect.